marriage. That beautiful promise people make when they believe love will be enough. For 12 years, I believed it too. My name is Elena Brooks, and I'm an architect living in the quiet coastal town of Millbrook, Maine. For more than a decade, I thought my life was solid, carefully designed, structurally sound. But architects learn something very important about buildings. Sometimes the cracks appear long before the collapse. You just don't want to see them. The rain that night sounded like thousands of tiny nails striking the windows of our 2-story colonial house. Millbrook storms had a way of making everything feel heavier, darker. It was past midnight when I heard the low purr of a car pulling into the driveway. Not my husband's. Through the security camera app on my phone, I watched the screen quietly from the bed. A silver Porsche stopped beneath the dim porch light. The driver's door opened, and then my husband stepped out. Samuel Brooks, my husband of 12 years, successful corporate attorney, respected in town. The man everyone believed was devoted to his wife. He wasn't alone. From the passenger seat stepped a tall woman in a sleek black coat. Blonde hair, perfect posture, laughing softly as she leaned closer to him. I watched them through the camera feed, the way he touched her back, the way she adjusted his collar, the way they stood just a little too close for people who were supposed to be strangers. Samuel had told me he had been at a late client dinner. Apparently that dinner included a luxury car and a woman who clearly wasn't me. They kissed. Not a quick mistake, not hesitation. A slow, comfortable kiss. The kind of kiss people share when they've done it many times before. My chest tightened, but strangely, my hands didn't shake, because deep down, I think a part of me had already been expecting this. Samuel lingered outside for another minute, whispering something that made the woman laugh again. Then she drove away. He walked into the house like nothing had happened. I quickly locked my phone and lay still in bed. A few seconds later, he quietly slipped under the covers beside me. His body smelled like expensive perfume. Definitely not mine. "How was dinner?" I murmured sleepily. He paused for half a second. "Boring," he said smoothly. "Just contract negotiations with the Morrison account." Samuel had always been a very good liar. That's what made him such a successful lawyer. But as I listened to his breathing slowly calm beside me, something settled cold in my chest. Because I realized something that night. But I am an architect. And architects are very good at recognizing structural flaws. 3 weeks later, my husband would be standing in our kitchen while police officers read him his rights. And everything he built with lies would collapse. Just like a badly designed building. And I didn't destroy his life. He did that himself. I'm 39 years old, and for most of my adult life, people described me with the same word: practical. Architects don't get the luxury of being careless dreamers. Our work is built on numbers, weight distribution, foundations, and balance. If we miscalculate even slightly, an entire building can fail. That mindset shaped how I lived my life. Careful decisions, long-term thinking, stability over excitement. Which is probably why I fell for Samuel Brooks. We met 15 years ago at a charity fundraiser hosted by the Millbrook Historical Society. I had just returned from Boston after finishing my architecture degree and starting my small design firm. Millbrook is the kind of town where everybody knows everybody. And when someone new shows up wearing an expensive suit and speaking confidently about corporate law, people notice. Samuel had just moved from Portland to join a prestigious law firm in town. I remember exactly how we met. I was standing near the silent auction table studying the blueprints of a restoration project for the old Millbrook Library when a voice behind me said, "You know that staircase violates 3 safety codes." I turned around and saw a tall man smiling at me. Sharp jawline, dark hair, calm, confident eyes. "Are you criticizing my profession?" I asked. "Only slightly," he said. "I'm Samuel." "Elena." We shook hands, and that was the beginning. Samuel was charming in a way that made people feel important. When he talked to you, it felt like the rest of the room disappeared. He asked about my architecture projects. I asked about his legal work. By the end of the night, we were sitting together at a small table in the corner, laughing like we had known each other for years. 2 months later, we were dating. A year later, we were engaged. Samuel proposed on the dock overlooking Millbrook Lake at sunset. He got down on one knee with a velvet box and said, "Elena Brooks has a nice ring to it." I laughed and said yes before he even finished the sentence. At the time, everything felt perfect. We were ambitious, educated, and young enough to believe we could build anything we wanted together. I already owned the house we lived in, a charming 2-story colonial I had purchased after landing my first big architectural contract. Samuel insisted he didn't mind that I had bought it before we married. "Your success is attractive," he once told me. Back then, I believed him. For the first few years, our marriage was good, peaceful, predictable. I ran my architecture firm designing small commercial buildings, community centers, and renovations around southern Maine. Samuel climbed quickly through the ranks at his law firm. People in town admired us. We were the couple who hosted dinner parties, the couple who volunteered at charity events, the couple who seemed to have everything together. But if I'm being honest, there were tiny warning signs, small cracks in the foundation. Samuel liked attention. A lot. He enjoyed expensive suits, luxury cars, and being seen with influential people. He loved walking into a room and immediately becoming the center of it. I didn't mind at first. I thought it was confidence. But over time, it started to feel like something else. Restlessness. He often complained that Millbrook was too small for his ambitions. One night, about 6 years into our marriage, he said something that stuck with me. "You ever feel like we're wasting our potential here?" I looked up from my architectural sketches. "What do you mean?" He gestured vaguely toward the window, toward the quiet town streets outside. "This place is comfortable. But comfortable isn't how people become powerful." I laughed softly. "I design buildings people actually use. Schools, libraries, clinics, and strip malls," he added with a small smirk. I shrugged. "They serve communities." Samuel didn't respond. He just stared out the window like the town had somehow disappointed him. I should have understood the meaning behind that moment. But love makes you ignore warning signs. And there was another complication in our marriage. My best friend, Patrick Hart. Patrick and I had grown up together in Millbrook. We had built tree houses behind the elementary school, rode bikes down the same dirt roads, and survived the awkward years of high school side by side. Patrick eventually became a private investigator after leaving the police department. He was blunt, loyal, and protective. And from the very beginning, he never liked Samuel, not even a little. The feeling was mutual. Samuel often joked that Patrick was paranoid by profession. Patrick once told me privately, "That husband of yours smiles too much." I laughed it off. "Patrick, you think everyone is suspicious." "Not everyone," he said. "Just the ones who are hiding something." At the time, I thought he was being dramatic. Now looking back, I realized Patrick might have seen the structural cracks in my marriage long before I did. And by the time the truth finally revealed itself, the entire building was already collapsing. If betrayal always arrived wearing a warning label, maybe more marriages could be saved. But that's not how it happens. It doesn't begin with lipstick on a collar or a dramatic midnight confession. It begins quietly. A shift in tone, a delayed reply, a look that lingers a second too long before turning away. The kind of changes that are small enough to excuse until they aren't. For me, the first real change in Samuel happened about a year before everything fell apart. He became harder to reach, not physically at first, emotionally. He was still in the house, still sleeping beside me, still drinking coffee at the kitchen island in the mornings while reading emails on his phone. But it felt like he was slowly stepping backward behind glass, present and unavailable. At first, I blamed stress. His firm had taken on several high-profile corporate clients, and Samuel liked to act as though the weight of the legal world rested entirely on his shoulders. "Big case," he'd say, rubbing the back of his neck. "Late night. Another client dinner. Weekend strategy meeting. I believed him because his explanations always sounded polished and reasonable. That was one of Samuel's greatest talents. He knew how to make lies wear the clothes of logic. Still, there were things I noticed. He started protecting his phone in small, almost invisible ways, turning the screen face down, taking calls in the garage, stepping outside when certain messages came through. Once, while we were watching television, his phone lit up on the coffee table. I didn't mean to look, but I saw a woman's name flash across the screen. Vanessa. No last name, just Vanessa. Samuel grabbed the phone before I could ask. "Client," he said lightly. Then he smiled at me in that practiced way of his and added, "Try not to look so suspicious, Elena. You'll hurt my feelings." He made it sound playful. I forced a smile. But something cold lingered in my stomach long after that. The changes weren't only with him. They were with his family, too. Samuel's mother, Diane Brooks, had always treated me with a kind of polished politeness that never quite became warmth. She was the sort of woman who could insult you while smiling. At family dinners, she would praise Samuel endlessly. My son was always meant for bigger things. Or, he has such refined tastes. He needs a life that reflects that. Sometimes she would glance around my dining room as if my carefully restored colonial home was somehow not elegant enough for him. His younger sister, Rebecca, was less subtle. She once said, right in front of me, while sipping white wine at Thanksgiving, "I still don't understand how my brother ended up staying in Millbrook. He could have been in New York by now." Samuel laughed, not because it was funny, because he agreed. That laugh stayed with me. Later that night, while I stood at the sink washing dishes, I asked him quietly, "Do you ever regret marrying me?" The question came out softer than I intended. Samuel looked genuinely surprised. "Where is that coming from? You and your family keep talking like this life is beneath you." He sighed, irritated already. "Elena, not everything is an attack. Sometimes people just want more." I dried my hands slowly and turned to face him. "And do you?" He hesitated, just for a second. Then he kissed my forehead and said, "You overthink everything." That wasn't an answer. And deep down, I knew it. Patrick noticed the distance too. A few weeks later, he stopped by my office with coffee from Murphy's Diner and found me staring at the same blueprint for 10 straight minutes without actually seeing it. "You look tired," he said, setting the cup down in front of me. "I am tired." Marriage tired or work tired? I gave him a dry look. "You always ask dangerous questions." He sat across from my desk, studying me the way investigators study rooms. "Elena, has he done something?" "No." That answer came too fast. Patrick raised one eyebrow. "He's just busy," I added. Patrick leaned back in his chair. Busy people don't usually start dressing like they're auditioning for a luxury watch ad unless they're trying to impress someone. I almost laughed. Almost. Because the truth was, Samuel had changed his style over the past few months. New cologne, new tailored suits, haircuts every 2 weeks instead of every 2 months, gym membership, whitening strips in the bathroom cabinet. Vanity, I told myself. Midlife insecurity, maybe, but there was more. He started criticizing things he had once claimed to love. The town, the house, my work. One evening, I showed him early sketches for a community art center I'd been designing for the town council. He barely looked at them. "Another civic passion project?" I frowned. It matters to people. He loosened his tie and walked past me toward the bar cart. "Maybe, but sometimes I think you confuse meaningful with small." The words stung more than I expected. I looked down at my drawings, carefully measured lines, spaces designed to bring children, families, and neighbors together, and suddenly they seemed fragile in my hands. "You used to respect what I do," I said quietly. "I do respect it," he replied, pouring himself a drink. "I just think you could have done more." Could have done more. The strange thing was, he didn't say it cruelly. He said it like a verdict, as though he had already upgraded his idea of the future, and I no longer fit inside it. Then came the nights he stopped bothering to explain properly. "I'll be late. I have dinner. Don't wait up." Simple, efficient, cold. He began smelling unfamiliar more often. expensive perfume, hotel soap, wine that I hadn't poured. And every time I asked a question, he had a ready answer. A client meeting, a delayed negotiation, traffic from Portland, unexpected paperwork. Technically possible explanations, but marriage teaches you the difference between truth and timing. And Samuel's timing had become too perfect. Around the same period, Patrick started mentioning that he'd seen Samuel around town at odd hours. Not proof, just details. Samuel leaving a restaurant long after his firm claimed to be hosting an event elsewhere. Samuel's car parked near the lakefront district on a Sunday afternoon when he'd told me he was reviewing case files. Samuel entering the lobby of the Harbor Grand Hotel, not with a briefcase, but carrying nothing except car keys. Patrick didn't push. He just told me what he had seen. I hated hearing it. Not because I thought Patrick was lying, but because I was beginning to fear he wasn't. The final seed of conflict, the one that truly lodged itself inside me, came 2 weeks before the night of the Porsche. It was raining, and I was in our home office revising commercial facade drawings when Samuel came in already irritated. "I need the tax records from last year," he said. "They're in the filing cabinet." He opened the drawer, shuffled papers, then asked, too casually, "You still have the deed paperwork for the house in there too?" I looked up. "Yes, why?" "No reason. Just asking." Something in his tone made my skin prickle. He found the folder, glanced through it, then slid it back. When he left the room, I stared at the cabinet for a long time. That question didn't feel random. It felt like someone checking the position of a load-bearing beam before trying to bring a structure down. I didn't know it then. But Samuel wasn't just having an affair. He was already thinking ahead, planning, calculating. And the tension in my marriage was no longer just emotional. It was architectural. The foundation had been weakened. The walls were beginning to shift. And very soon, something inside my life was going to crack wide open. The morning after the Porsche appeared in my driveway began like any other stormy day in Millbrook. Gray sky, cold rain streaking the windows. The smell of coffee drifting through the kitchen. Samuel had already left for work by the time I woke up. At least, that's what his note on the counter said. Early meeting. Don't wait for me tonight. His handwriting was neat, controlled, the same handwriting he used when signing legal contracts. I stood there for a moment, reading the note twice. Then I crumpled it and dropped it into the trash. Because for the first time in 12 years, I wasn't interested in pretending everything was normal. Still, I didn't confront him that day. Architects understand something important about collapsing structures. If you rush inside too quickly, you might miss the real cause of failure. So instead, I watched. I paid attention. And within 24 hours, the truth arrived in the strangest way imaginable. It was around 7:30 the next morning. I was reviewing blueprints in my home office when the front door slammed open hard enough to shake the hallway. "Elena!" Samuel's voice echoed through the house. I stepped out of the office. He stood in the foyer, breathing hard, his suit jacket damp from rain. But it wasn't the rain that caught my attention. It was his expression. Fear. Real fear. "Elena, thank God you're here," he said, running a hand through his hair. "Someone broke into the house." I blinked. "What?" "The living room. They trashed it." I followed him downstairs. And for a moment, I genuinely thought we had been robbed. Couch cushions scattered across the floor. Drawers pulled out and dumped. The coffee table overturned. My jewelry box lay open on the hardwood floor. It looked like a tornado had passed through our living room. I crossed the room slowly, scanning the mess. "Did you call the police?" I asked. Samuel hesitated. "I wanted to tell you first." That answer alone made something tighten in my chest. Normal people call the police immediately. They don't run home first. "Oh God," Samuel said suddenly, rubbing his temples. "I think I know who did this." I turned toward him. "Who?" He looked up at me with wide eyes. "Patrick." The name landed like a stone dropping into water. "Patrick Hart?" I said slowly. "Yes," Samuel said quickly. "I saw him outside last night when I got home, around midnight, just standing near the driveway. That was the moment something inside me went very still, because I remembered something Samuel didn't know. Patrick had been sitting in Murphy's diner with me until 12:30 a.m. the night before. Samuel kept talking. He looked angry, he said. You know how he is, always suspicious of me. I folded my arms. You think my best friend broke into our house. Samuel gestured helplessly at the room. Elena, look around. His voice had shifted. It had become calm, controlled, almost persuasive. The way lawyers build arguments in front of juries. He's been acting strange lately, Samuel continued. And you know he's been struggling since his divorce. I didn't answer. Instead, I knelt beside the jewelry box on the floor, empty. Samuel stepped closer. My grandmother's necklace is gone, he said quietly, and the Tiffany bracelet you gave me for our anniversary. His tone was just the right balance between sadness and anger. It was almost impressive. But the more I looked around the room, the less convincing it became, because something about the destruction felt wrong, not random, too deliberate, like someone trying very hard to make a mess look authentic. I stood up slowly. We should call the police. Samuel moved instantly. His hand shot out and grabbed my wrist. Maybe we should think about it first. I looked down at his fingers gripping my arm. Then I looked up at him. If Patrick is having problems, Samuel said carefully, maybe we should help him instead of getting the police involved. The logic sounded noble, but it made absolutely no sense. Patrick had never stolen anything in his life, and Samuel knew that. I gently pulled my wrist away and reached for my phone. No, I said calmly. We're calling the police. Samuel opened his mouth to argue, but the call was already dialing. 20 minutes later, Detective Laura Mendez stood in the middle of our destroyed living room. She had transferred to Millbrook from Portland 6 months earlier and had already gained a reputation for being the kind of officer who didn't miss details. Her eyes moved across the room slowly. Mrs. Brooks, she said, turning toward me, your husband told me he suspects Patrick Hart. I looked at Samuel. He nodded solemnly. I hate to say it, he added, but yes. Detective Mendez wrote something in her notebook. What makes you think it was him? Samuel cleared his throat. I saw him outside the house last night, around 11:30. 11:30. The time was precise, prepared, like testimony. He's always disliked me, Samuel continued. He's made comments about Elena marrying the wrong man. Detective Mendez nodded slightly. Do you have any security cameras? Yes, I said. We have a smart doorbell and interior cameras. Samuel stiffened, just a little. But I noticed. Because architects notice structural shifts. Let's review the footage, the detective said. I walked into the office and opened the security system on my laptop. A few seconds later, the video filled the screen. Here's the driveway, I said. We watched silently. At 11:47 p.m., Samuel's BMW pulled into the driveway. Samuel sat inside the car for several minutes, talking on the phone. Then he got out and entered the house. No Patrick. No suspicious figure. Nothing. Samuel frowned. That's strange. I could have sworn I saw him. Detective Mendez didn't comment. Let's check the living room camera, she said. I clicked to the interior feed. The timestamp showed 6:23 a.m. The living room appeared exactly the way it always did. Clean, quiet, peaceful. Then, at 6:24 a.m., someone walked into frame. Samuel, my husband. For the next 15 minutes, we watched him destroy our living room. He pulled open drawers, threw couch cushions across the floor, dumped my jewelry onto the carpet, carefully slipped several pieces into his briefcase. Then he overturned the empty jewelry box onto the floor. When he finished, he stepped back and looked around the room, like an artist admiring a finished painting. The room went silent. Even the rain outside seemed quieter. Detective Mendez slowly closed her notebook. Then she turned to Samuel. Mr. Brooks, she said calmly, I'm going to need you to put your hands behind your back. And in that moment, my entire marriage collapsed. Not with shouting, not with tears, but with the cold metallic sound of handcuffs closing. There's a strange moment after a disaster, right after the collapse, but before the dust settles, where your mind refuses to accept what your eyes just witnessed. That was the moment I was standing inside when Detective Mendez placed the handcuffs on Samuel. The metal clicked. Sharp. Final. My husband didn't resist. He didn't shout. He simply stared at the screen where the footage had been playing. His own movements. His own hands. Systematically destroying our living room. For a second, I wondered if he would try to argue. He was a lawyer, after all. But the evidence was so clear, so humiliatingly undeniable, that even Samuel Brooks couldn't twist it. "Mr. Brooks," Detective Mendez said calmly, "you are under arrest for filing a false police report and attempting to obstruct an investigation." Samuel slowly turned his head toward me. The look in his eyes wasn't guilt. It wasn't even shame. It was calculation. Like he was already planning the next move. "Elena," he said quietly, "this isn't what it looks like." I almost laughed, because I had just watched him stage a crime scene on video. The officers escorted him toward the door. As they walked past me, Samuel leaned slightly closer and whispered, "We'll talk about this later." Later, as if we were discussing dinner plans. The patrol car disappeared down the rainy Millbrook Street a few minutes later. The house fell silent. I stood alone in the living room, couch cushions scattered, drawers hanging open, my jewelry box lying on the floor. The storm outside hadn't stopped. Rain tapped steadily against the windows, like someone trying to get my attention. But the strange thing was, I didn't cry. Not then. Instead, I began cleaning. I picked up the cushions, closed the drawers, placed the jewelry box back on the table. My hands moved automatically. Architects have a habit of restoring order, even when the structure around them is collapsing. An hour later, my phone rang. It was Patrick. "I just heard," he said immediately. Millbrook was small. News traveled faster than the internet. "You okay?" he asked. I looked around the quiet house. "No," I said honestly. Patrick sighed. "That man tried to frame me." "Yes." "Are you surprised?" I thought about the Porsche, the perfume, the late-night client dinners, and the video I had just watched. "No," I said softly. "I think part of me saw it coming." Patrick was silent for a moment. "You want me to come over?" "Yes." 30 minutes later, his old pickup truck pulled into my driveway. Patrick walked in without knocking. He took one look at my face and muttered, "Jesus, I'm fine." "No, you're not." We sat at the kitchen island, 2 cups of coffee between us. The rain continued outside. Patrick rubbed his jaw. "So let me get this straight," he said. "He staged a burglary, blamed me, and thought the cameras wouldn't expose him?" "Yes." Patrick let out a low whistle. "That's either incredibly stupid or incredibly desperate." I stared into my coffee. I think it was calculated. Patrick leaned forward. "What do you mean?" "I think Samuel wanted to make you look unstable." Patrick frowned. "And why would he do that?" "Because you trust me. Because you would defend me. Because if he could destroy your credibility first, no one would believe you if you accused him of anything later." Patrick's expression darkened. "That's not just stupid," he said quietly. "That's strategic." Exactly. And that realization led to a far more uncomfortable question. If Samuel was willing to stage a burglary, what else had he been planning? That afternoon, the story spread across Millbrook. Prominent attorney arrested for false police report. The Millbrook Gazette posted the article online by lunchtime. They used Samuel's professional headshot beside a photo of him being escorted into the police station. Millbrook loved scandals, especially when the people involved had once seemed perfect. Samuel was released that evening. No jail time. Just a fine and a temporary suspension from his law firm while the investigation continued. But reputation in a town like ours was fragile, and Samuel's had just cracked. I was waiting in the kitchen when he came home, not as his wife, but as someone who had already made a decision. The divorce papers were spread across the granite countertop like blueprints. When he walked through the door, he froze. "Elena." His voice sounded exhausted. His perfect lawyer appearance had vanished. His tie was loosened, his hair messy. "I think we need to talk," he said. I tapped the papers with a pen. I already did. He walked closer. "What is this?" "Divorce papers." His eye. "You're serious?" "Yes." For the first time all day, anger flickered across his face. "You're overreacting." I laughed. "You tried to frame my best friend for burglary." It wasn't like that. Oh? I tilted my head. Then explain the video. Samuel then closed it again, because there was no explanation that didn't make him look guilty. You made a mistake, he said finally. Everyone makes mistakes. A mistake is forgetting an anniversary, I replied quietly. A mistake is not staging a crime to destroy someone's life. Samuel's eyes moved to the divorce papers again. You can't just throw away 12 years like this. I leaned back against the counter. Actually, I can. His expression hardened. This house is half mine. I shook my head slowly. No, it isn't. He frowned. What? I bought this house before we got married. I pointed at the paperwork. You insisted on keeping your name off the deed for tax reasons. Samuel went very still. Remember? I said softly. His silence told me he remembered perfectly. And I've already frozen our joint accounts, I continued, and changed the locks. Now real anger flashed across his face. This is about Patrick, he snapped. You're choosing him over your husband. I stared at him. No, I said quietly. This is about the fact that I don't know who you are anymore. For the first time since the arrest, Samuel looked uncertain, like he had lost control of the script. But I wasn't finished. I walked toward the door, then paused. Oh, I said casually. And Samuel? He looked up. I know about Vanessa Carter. The blood drained from his face. I don't know what you're talking about. I smiled faintly. The silver Porsche, the perfume. The late-night client meetings that magically happen when she's in town. Samuel said nothing, because architects notice details. And once you see the cracks, you can't pretend the building is still standing. Samuel's silence after I mentioned Vanessa Carter lasted only a few seconds. But in that silence, I saw something important. Fear. Not fear of losing me. Fear of being exposed. You're imagining things, he said finally, recovering his lawyer's composure. The denial came smoothly, practiced, almost automatic. I crossed my arms. Then explain the Porsche, he shrugged. Vanessa is a client. She gave me a ride home after a meeting. And the perfume? Restaurant smells linger. And the kiss? Samuel froze. For the first time that evening, he looked genuinely rattled. You were watching the cameras, he asked. I was lying in bed while my husband kissed another woman in the driveway, I replied. His jaw tightened. That doesn't mean anything. I laughed quietly. 12 years of marriage, I said. And that's the best explanation you could come up with? Samuel's expression hardened. You're blowing this out of proportion. No, I said calmly. I'm finally seeing things clearly. He opened his mouth again, but this time no clever legal argument came out, because there wasn't one. And that was when Samuel did something revealing. He changed tactics. Elena, he said, lowering his voice, divorce is messy, expensive. We should handle this quietly. I tilted my head. Quietly? Yes. Meaning? His eyes flickered toward the divorce papers. You drop this filing, we go to counseling, work things out. The offer sounded reasonable, too reasonable. I studied his face carefully. You're not trying to save our marriage, I said. He didn't respond. You're trying to save your reputation. Samuel's silence was confirmation, because the truth was obvious. A cheating husband was embarrassing, but a lawyer arrested for filing a false police report and staging a burglary? That was career-ending. Your firm doesn't know the whole story yet, do they? I asked. His jaw tightened again. Internal review, he muttered. And if the divorce gets public? He didn't answer, but I already knew. Millbrook was small. A scandal like this would spread faster than wildfire. Samuel exhaled slowly. Let's be adults about this, he said. I am, I replied. Then I pushed the divorce papers toward him. You should get a lawyer. He stared at them. Then he laughed bitterly. You really think you're going to win here? I blinked. This house, he continued, gesturing around the kitchen. Your business, everything you built. You think divorce courts don't care about marriage length? I studied him carefully. Samuel was trying to intimidate me, the same way he intimidated opposing counsel in court. But he had forgotten something important. I wasn't a nervous witness. I was the woman who had spent 12 years studying the architecture of his personality. You're welcome to try, I said quietly. Samuel's eyes narrowed. You'll regret this. I didn't respond, because deep down, I had already realized something. Samuel wasn't worried about losing me. He was worried about losing control. And the moment I filed for divorce, that control disappeared. The town begins talking. Millbrook didn't stay quiet for long. By Monday morning, the entire town knew. Samuel's arrest, the staged burglary, the divorce filing. People whispered in grocery store aisles. Neighbors slowed their cars while passing my house. Even clients at my architecture firm called with awkward sympathy. Small towns run on information and scandals. That afternoon, Melissa Grant called. Melissa was Samuel's longtime social circle friend and one of Millbrook's most enthusiastic gossip distributors. "Elena, honey," she said dramatically, "are you okay?" "I've had worse Mondays." She lowered her voice. "You should know, people are talking about Samuel and Vanessa." My grip tightened on the phone. "What exactly are they saying?" "That it's been going on for months." Months. The word landed like a hammer. "How long?" I asked quietly. 8 months, Melissa said. "Maybe longer." I leaned back in my chair slowly. 8 months. 8 months of lies. 8 months of late night dinners. 8 months of pretending everything was fine. Melissa continued. "And there's something else." "What?" "Vanessa Carter isn't just a client." My stomach tightened. "She's a real estate developer," Melissa said. "Big projects in Portland and Boston." That explained the Porsche, the designer clothes, the confidence. "And Samuel's been helping her negotiate land acquisitions," Melissa added. "Very personal negotiations, apparently." I closed my eyes for a moment. Not just an affair. A business alliance. Samuel wasn't just cheating. He was building something with her. Melissa lowered her voice again. "Elena, I probably shouldn't tell you this." "What?" "They've been talking about leaving Millbrook." I opened my eyes slowly. "Leaving?" "Yes. Vanessa wants to expand development projects down the coast. Samuel's been talking about joining her company as legal counsel." My chest felt strangely hollow. So that was the plan. Destroy my credibility, secure a favorable divorce settlement, then disappear with Vanessa and start a brand new life. Samuel hadn't just betrayed me. He had designed an exit strategy. Melissa hesitated. "There's one more thing," she said quietly. "What?" "I heard them arguing yesterday." My attention sharpened instantly. "Arguing about what?" Melissa lowered her voice to a whisper. "Vanessa's worried Samuel is becoming a liability." I sat upright. "Why?" "Well," Melissa said carefully, "staging fake burglaries and getting arrested tends to make investors nervous." For the first time that day, I smiled. Not because the situation was funny, but because something suddenly became very clear. Samuel had spent months building a future with Vanessa Carter, but now the entire structure was beginning to wobble. Cracks in the foundation, structural pressure, instability. Architects recognized those warning signs immediately, which meant something interesting. Samuel's plan wasn't just failing, it was collapsing. And the most dangerous part of any collapsing structure is the moment right before it falls. The strange thing about betrayal is that the pain doesn't arrive all at once. At first, everything feels almost unreal, like watching someone else's life collapse through a foggy window. But eventually, the reality sinks in. And when it does, it's quiet. That night, after the phone call with Melissa, I sat alone on the back porch. The rain had finally stopped, but the air still smelled damp and cold. Millbrook was silent. The kind of silence that only exists in small towns after midnight. No traffic. No voices. Just the distant sound of wind moving through the trees. For 12 years, Samuel and I had shared this house, this porch, this life. I remembered the night we moved in together. He had carried the last box through the door and laughed. "Look at us," he said. "Real adults now." We sat on this exact porch, drinking cheap wine out of coffee mugs, because we hadn't unpacked the glasses yet. Back then, the future had felt simple, possible. I closed my eyes, and for the first time since everything began collapsing, I cried. Not loud, not dramatic. Just quiet tears sliding down my face. Because the hardest part wasn't the affair. It wasn't even the lies. It was the realization that the man I had loved for 12 years might never have truly existed. Had he ever respected my life here? Had he ever appreciated the work I built in this town? Or had he always been waiting for something bigger, waiting for someone richer? Someone like Vanessa Carter. I thought about the conversations we used to have, the plans, the dreams. And suddenly those memories felt like blueprints drawn on sand, structures that looked real until the tide came in. My phone buzzed softly on the porch table. Patrick. I wiped my face and answered. Hey, you sound tired, he said immediately. I am. He was quiet for a moment. You want company? I hesitated, then nodded instinctively before remembering he couldn't see me. Yes. 20 minutes later, his truck headlights rolled into the driveway. Patrick walked onto the porch carrying 2 paper cups from Murphy's Diner. He handed one to me without saying anything. Hot coffee, exactly the way I liked it. We sat side by side in silence for several minutes. Patrick finally spoke. You know, he said, staring out at the dark yard, I always thought Samuel was the kind of man who would burn down a house just to collect the insurance money. I gave a weak smile. That's a very specific comparison. He shrugged. I'm a private investigator. Suspicion is my love language. For a moment, we both laughed quietly. Then the laughter faded. Patrick leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. Elena, he said gently, this isn't your fault. I know. But the truth was, part of me still questioned everything. Maybe I ignored the signs, I admitted. Patrick shook his head immediately. People who lie professionally are very good at it. He's a lawyer. Exactly. Patrick glanced toward the house. You built a good life here. Apparently not good enough. Patrick turned toward me sharply. Don't do that. Do what? Rewrite your own worth based on someone else's bad decisions. I stared into my coffee. Samuel's words from earlier echoed in my head. You've never had an ambitious day in your life. Maybe that was how he truly saw me. A small-town architect, designing libraries and community centers, while he dreamed of skyscrapers and power. Patrick seemed to read my thoughts. You know what Samuel's real problem is? He said. What? He thinks success only exists in big cities and expensive offices. He gestured toward the quiet street. But people here trust you, respect you. You build things that actually matter. I sighed softly. That doesn't feel like much tonight. Patrick nodded slowly. That's fair. Another silence settled between us. Finally, he said something that made my chest tighten. Elena, I've been doing some digging. I turned toward him. Digging? On Samuel. Of course he had. Patrick had probably started investigating the moment Samuel accused him of burglary. What did you find? I asked quietly. Patrick rubbed the back of his neck. I wasn't going to tell you tonight. Tell me. He hesitated, then sighed. Samuel's been meeting Vanessa Carter a lot more than just 8 months. My stomach dropped. How long? Patrick looked at me carefully. Almost 2 years. 2 years. Half of our recent marriage. Every family dinner. Every anniversary. Every holiday. Samuel had already been living a double life. I stared out into the dark yard again. The wind moved softly through the trees. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. For the first time since the divorce papers, I felt completely empty. Like the emotional structure holding me up had finally cracked. Patrick noticed. Hey, he said softly, you're going to get through this. I nodded slowly. I know. But deep down, I had reached the lowest point, the place where nothing feels certain anymore, where the future looks blank, where the past suddenly feels like a lie. For 12 years, I had believed my marriage was a solid structure, but now I understood something painful. It had never been built on love. It had been built on ambition, on appearances, on Samuel's endless hunger for more. And buildings like that never survive the storm. I sat quietly on the porch, watching the dark Millbrook street, trying to imagine what my life would look like after the collapse. What I didn't know yet was that the real truth about Samuel and Vanessa was still hidden. And when that truth finally surfaced, every 2 days after that night on the porch, the rain finally stopped. Millbrook woke up under a pale gray sky and the kind of quiet that follows a long storm. The streets were still wet, reflecting the storefront lights like glass. I arrived early at my architecture office. hoping work might quiet the constant noise inside my head. Blueprints usually helped. Numbers, measurements, structure, things that made sense. But that morning, I stared at the same community center design for nearly 20 minutes without drawing a single line. My mind kept drifting back to Patrick's words. 2 years. Samuel hadn't just made a mistake. He had been living another life. My phone buzzed on the desk. Patrick again. Morning, I answered. You at the office? Yes. I'm coming over, he said. Something in his voice made me sit up straight. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong, he said. Then he paused. But something just became very interesting. 15 minutes later, Patrick walked into my office holding a manila folder. Private investigators have a particular expression when they discover something big. A quiet satisfaction. Patrick had that look. He dropped into the chair across from my desk and placed the folder on the table. I talked to someone this morning, he said. Who? Vanessa Carter's assistant. That immediately caught my attention. How? Patrick shrugged. Turns out she's from Millbrook originally. Her parents still live here. And she's not particularly loyal to Vanessa. Patrick opened the folder and slid several printed documents toward me. Emails. Property filings. Corporate registrations. I frowned. What am I looking at? Patrick leaned forward. You remember how Melissa said Samuel was planning to join Vanessa's development company? Yes. Well, Patrick tapped one document. That's only half the story. I picked up the page. It was a corporate partnership proposal. Vanessa Carter's development company. Samuel Brooks listed as legal partner. But something else caught my attention. My name. Elena Brooks, financial asset source. My stomach dropped. What is this? Patrick's voice was calm. Samuel and Vanessa weren't just planning an affair. They were planning a financial takeover. I stared at the document. Vanessa's company had been negotiating land acquisitions across the Maine coastline. Large-scale developments, hotels, luxury waterfront condos, the kind of projects that required enormous funding. But the proposal listed a private capital source, me. Or more specifically, my architectural firm. My mind raced. That doesn't make sense, I said. My firm isn't an investment fund. Patrick nodded slowly. Correct. But your firm does own property. The realization hit me like cold water. The land I had purchased years ago for future development projects. Several small commercial plots across southern Maine. Land that had quietly increased in value over time. Samuel knew exactly what those properties were worth. Patrick tapped another page. This proposal outlines a plan to convince you to sign development partnership agreements. I felt sick. Samuel would gain access to your land assets, Patrick continued. Vanessa's company would secure financing using those assets as leverage. And once the projects launched, they'd control everything. My hands trembled slightly as I turned the pages. Legal clauses, asset transfers, equity ownership structures. Samuel had written most of it himself. I recognized his drafting style instantly. He wasn't just cheating, I whispered. No, Patrick said quietly. He was building a business empire on top of your work. And suddenly the staged burglary made sense. If Samuel could portray Patrick as unstable, if he could make me look paranoid, if the divorce court believed I was emotionally unstable, he might gain control of the assets. Patrick watched my face carefully. You okay? Yes, I said, but the word came out colder than I expected, because in that moment, something inside me changed. For days, I had been mourning the collapse of my marriage, but now I realized something far more important. Samuel hadn't just betrayed me emotionally. He had planned to steal everything I built. Patrick leaned forward. There's more. I looked up. What? Vanessa Carter's company isn't stable. He slid another document across the desk. Financial records, debt reports, loan defaults. Her last 2 developments failed, Patrick said. She's drowning in investor pressure. And Samuel knew that? Oh yeah. Patrick gave a dry laugh. He was helping her hide assets and restructure debt. I sat back slowly. So that was the real plan. Samuel and Vanessa weren't building a future together. They were building an escape route, using my assets to secure financing, then leaving Millbrook once the projects launched. And if the investments collapsed, they'd leave me holding the legal consequences. Patrick watched me carefully. "What are you thinking?" I closed the folder slowly. For the first time in days, I felt calm. Not sad. Not angry, just clear. "I'm thinking," I said quietly, "that Samuel and Vanessa made a very serious mistake." Patrick raised an eyebrow. "What mistake?" "They assumed I wouldn't notice the structural flaws." Patrick smiled slowly. "That sounds like an architect talking." "It is. Because architects understand something critical about buildings. Once you identify the weak points, you can predict exactly how the structure will collapse. And Samuel's entire scheme, it wasn't just unethical, it was unstable. Vanessa's company was already drowning in debt. Samuel had falsified financial documents. They had attempted fraud using my assets. And now, thanks to Patrick's investigation, I had proof. I stood up and walked to the window overlooking Millbrook's quiet street. For days, I had felt like a victim, a betrayed wife, a woman watching her marriage fall apart. But now the story looked very different. Samuel and Vanessa had built their entire future on lies, on greed, on manipulation, and most importantly, on the assumption that I wouldn't fight back. I turned back toward Patrick. "Do you know Detective Mendez's number?" I asked. Patrick smiled wider. "Oh, Elena, now you're thinking like me. Because the moment you expose the cracks in a dishonest structure, collapse becomes inevitable. And Samuel Brooks had just unknowingly designed the blueprint for his own downfall. When a structure finally collapses, it rarely happens slowly. Years of pressure build quietly inside the walls, and then one day, everything gives way at once. That was exactly what happened to Samuel Brooks and Vanessa Carter. The dominoes started falling 3 days after Patrick brought me the folder. Detective Laura Mendez called me at 9 in the morning. Her tone was calm, but there was a quiet satisfaction beneath it. "Ms. Brooks," she said, "the information you and Mr. Hart provided was extremely helpful." "I'm glad to hear that. We've opened a formal investigation into Carter Development." I leaned back in my chair. "Financial fraud?" "That," she said, "and several other things." It turned out Patrick's documents had exposed something much larger than Samuel's personal betrayal. Vanessa Carter had been running a complicated web of failing development projects across 3 states: luxury condo proposals, resort construction plans, waterfront commercial centers, each project financed by investors who believed her company was stable. But the truth was very different. Several developments had already collapsed financially. Loans were overdue. Contractors hadn't been paid. And Vanessa had been desperately searching for new capital to keep the entire operation alive. That was where Samuel came in. Detective Mendez explained it carefully. "Your husband drafted several partnership agreements," she said. "Agreements that would have transferred access to your company's land holdings. Without my consent?" "Eventually he would have needed it," Mendez replied. "But the documents show he intended to pressure you during the divorce settlement." Exactly as Patrick predicted. If Samuel had successfully framed Patrick and made me appear unstable, the court could have questioned my business judgment. In the chaos of divorce negotiations, Samuel might have gained control over the development rights. Vanessa's company would secure financing. The projects would launch, and the two of them would walk away with millions. All built on assets I spent years acquiring. But their plan had one fatal flaw. They underestimated the structural integrity of the person they were trying to manipulate. Once the investigation started, everything unraveled quickly. Vanessa Carter's investors began asking questions. Her creditors demanded immediate payment. And once federal investigators discovered falsified financial reports, things escalated fast. Within 2 weeks, Carter Development filed for bankruptcy protection. The news exploded across Maine's business networks. Developers from Portland to Boston began distancing themselves from Vanessa's company. Investors withdrew funding. Pending construction projects froze overnight. Samuel's law firm responded immediately. Corporate law firms are ruthless when protecting their reputation. They suspended Samuel without pay and launched an internal ethics review. 3 days later, they terminated him. Official statement: professional misconduct and ethical violations. Millbrook loved the story. The same town that once admired Samuel now whispered about him in grocery stores and coffee shops. The brilliant lawyer, the arrogant outsider, the man who tried to destroy his own wife for financial gain. Meanwhile, Vanessa Carter's situation grew worse by the day. Bankruptcy investigators discovered something extraordinary: hidden accounts, offshore transfers, undeclared corporate income. Millions of dollars quietly moved through shell companies in the Cayman Islands. Vanessa hadn't just been failing financially. She had been hiding money from creditors and investors, which turned a bankruptcy case into something much more serious: federal fraud, tax evasion, racketeering. One morning, Patrick burst into my office, carrying his phone, with a grin I hadn't seen since high school. "You're not going to believe this." "What?" "Vanessa Carter was arrested in Boston last night." I stared at him. "Federal charges?" "Oh yeah." Patrick dropped into the chair across from my desk. "Wire fraud, bankruptcy fraud, financial conspiracy. And Samuel?" Patrick smiled slightly. "He's not safe either." Because once federal investigators began examining Carter Development's legal paperwork, they found Samuel's name everywhere. Drafted contracts, asset concealment strategies, legal memos advising Vanessa how to restructure debt to avoid creditors. Even if Samuel believed he was just helping a client, the evidence told a very different story. The federal investigation expanded quickly. 2 weeks later, Samuel was formally charged with conspiracy to commit financial fraud. The news hit Millbrook like a thunderclap. My husband, the respected attorney who once lectured people about ethics, was now facing federal court. I received the update from Detective Mendez during another phone call. "Ms. Brooks," she said, "we believe Samuel Brooks knowingly participated in Carter's financial scheme." "What happens now?" "He's negotiating with prosecutors." Translation: Samuel was trying to save himself, but his options were limited. Vanessa Carter's financial records were extensive, and federal investigators had years of documentation. Eventually, both of them accepted plea agreements. Vanessa Carter received 22 years in federal prison for fraud and financial crimes. Samuel Brooks received 7 years for conspiracy and professional misconduct. When the final sentencing was announced, the courtroom was packed with reporters, but I wasn't there. I didn't need to watch the collapse, because by then, my life had already moved forward. Patrick stopped by my office the afternoon the news broke. "Well," he said, leaning against my doorway, "it's officially over." 7 years, I replied. Patrick nodded. He lost his law license too. Permanently. I stared out the office window at Millbrook's quiet streets. Construction crews were working on the community center project I had designed months earlier. Steel beams rising slowly against the sky. Solid. Carefully measured. Built to last. Patrick studied me for a moment. "You feel sorry for him?" I thought about Samuel sitting in a courtroom. About the lies. The greed. The elaborate plan to destroy my life for money. Then I shook my head. No. Because Samuel and Vanessa had built their entire future on dishonesty. And dishonest structures always fail eventually. They just didn't expect the collapse to happen so quickly. 6 months later, Millbrook felt quiet again. Small towns have a remarkable ability to absorb scandal and then slowly move on. New gossip replaces old headlines. Life continues. The reporters disappeared. The whispers faded. The courthouse drama became just another story people told over coffee at Murphy's Diner. And my house finally felt peaceful again. One evening, I sat on the same back porch where I had once cried during the worst night of my life. But everything felt different now. The air smelled like salt from the lake, and the sky was turning soft shades of orange as the sun disappeared behind the trees. Inside the house, the lights were warm and steady. No tension. No secrets. Just quiet. For the first time in a long while, I felt like the structure of my life was stable again. Patrick walked up the driveway carrying 2 bottles of beer. He handed me one and sat down beside me. "You look calmer," he said. "I am. Hard to believe everything that happened started with a fake burglary." I smiled faintly. "Architects are trained to spot damage quickly." Patrick chuckled. "Yeah, but I think this situation collapsed faster than even you expected." Maybe he was right. Samuel had once believed he could manipulate the entire situation. Frame Patrick. Control the divorce. Steal access to my business assets. Escape with Vanessa Carter and build a new life somewhere far away from Millbrook. Instead, everything he built collapsed. His career, his reputation, his freedom. Patrick took a sip of his beer and glanced toward the quiet street. "You ever hear from him?" "No." "Not even a letter?" "No." Patrick nodded slowly. "That's probably for the best." I agreed. Because the truth was, I didn't hate Samuel anymore. Hate requires emotional energy, and I had already spent enough of my life on him. What I felt instead was something simpler. Distance. Like looking at an abandoned building that once meant something to you, but no longer belongs in your life. Patrick broke the silence. "So what's next for Elena Brooks?" I laughed softly. "You make that sound dramatic." It is dramatic. You survived a scandal that took down a major development company and a corrupt lawyer. I designed a library renovation today. Patrick smiled. "That's what I mean." I looked out across the quiet neighborhood. Kids were riding bikes at the end of the street. Someone was mowing their lawn. A dog barked somewhere down the block. Normal life. Simple life. The kind of life Samuel once mocked. "You know something?" I said. "What?" "Samuel used to say my dreams were too small." Patrick raised an eyebrow. "Do you still believe that?" I shook my head. "No." Because I finally understood something important. Dreams aren't measured by how flashy they look from the outside. They're measured by whether they're real. Samuel wanted power. Vanessa wanted money. They built their future on lies, manipulation, and shortcuts. Their structure looked impressive from a distance, but the foundation was rotten. And buildings like that always collapse. Meanwhile, the life I built here in Millbrook might not look glamorous. Community centers, libraries, small office buildings, but every project was honest, every foundation solid, every blueprint designed to last. Patrick leaned back in his chair and stretched. "You know," he said, "there's something funny about this whole story." "What?" Samuel thought he was the smartest person in the room. I smiled slightly. He wasn't. "No," Patrick said. "He tried to outsmart an architect." The sky had darkened completely now. The streetlights flickered on, one by one, along the quiet road. I raised my bottle slightly and looked down the peaceful street. For a long time, I believed the end of my marriage would be the end of everything I built. But it wasn't. It was just the demolition of a bad structure. And sometimes, the best way to build something stronger is to clear away what was never stable to begin with. I took a sip of my beer and smiled into the quiet Maine night. Because sometimes the greatest revenge isn't destroying the people who tried to hurt you. Sometimes it's simply continuing to build a life so solid that their lies can never touch it again.